Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Funny, I walked out the door this morning and went, "Oh, it's not 45 degrees anymore. It's not even close to 45 degrees anymore." Turns out it's January in Ohio. Who knew?
Yeah, Tom. You know what I did this morning, brushing my teeth? I hit my phone, start the car from my phone, and crank that heat up, crank the defrost on. That way, when I get to the car, it's nice and warm. Because the day before I did it, and the signals were crossed, and it didn't work, and I had to defrost. And I bought a new car in July. I do not yet have a scraper for the car, so you just sit there and let's try some more wiper fluid. Well, I guess that helps a little, and then eventually you drive like this because you can see a little bit out the window, and then you go. Um, Kroger used to sell scrapers. They do not anymore. So I have not been anywhere. They don't have them in LA either. That was the last place I went shopping. They did not have them at Frank's in LA.
Yeah, we have. Shocking that Los Angeles is not the ice scraper capital of the world. I can't figure it out. I don't know
I,
why.
I was a little surprised. And we'll get to the news of the day. Our flight from Las Vegas to Columbus was delayed because the plane was in Santa Barbara and it got froze. It got freeze ice overnight, and they don't have de-icers in Santa Barbara. So you just have to let nature's de-icer do the work. And the sun eventually melted the ice on the plane, and we got to go home. But we've all had our struggles this week with weather.
We made it. We made it home. We made it. Yeah, it's the good news is we get to do this podcast indoors today, so that's a nice bonus.
It is, and there is news of the day as we promised. We set out all of these bits and pieces of the stream that we did the day after the Rose Bowl, but we promised if something happens, which was likely to happen, then we would break that streak and go to you plausibly live. And we are doing that now because Greg Studrawa has been let go by Ryan Day and is not the first domino to fall, but certainly the one that we we've kind of been preparing people for this when we talked about changes going on. And that was one that kind of kept putting out there that don't be surprised if this happens. And it has finally happened. And I think there's a lot of happy Buckeye fans, and there's also the other segment are doing the yeah, but, or the well actuallys. And so is it as, like the coaches say, is the film as bad as people think or as good as people think? It's probably somewhere in the middle. But when you're let go, it's usually for cause.
Yeah, it's well, not legally speaking, but yes, for a reason. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is we. I think we've been. I think I've probably directly said or hinted around the fact that we were sort of anticipating 3 to 4 assistant coaching changes this offseason, and I'm quite positive that at one point I said not just on defense. And when I said not just on defense, this is the name that I had been hearing, and I think several of us had been hearing for a while as a real possibility of a spot that could change. You look at the recruiting and the on-field performance, and everyone wants to point to the on-field performance this year. And it's like, yes, they were able to run the ball. They were able to throw the ball this year. A lot of that has to do with having really talented quarterbacks and wide receivers and that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure how much credit you want to give Studrawa for that. They were able to run the ball pretty well throughout the year. They actually finished almost at the top of the nation in terms of yards per carry, but they weren't able to run the ball at all, whenever they wanted to. And, the pass pro was real good until it wasn't. And then when it wasn't, it was like, oh boy, the pass pro was great until it got Aiden Hutchinson a trip to New York. So that's, you have to facts of life this. You take the good and you take the bad. But on the whole, you look at the recruiting, and the recruiting at a number of position groups is right at the absolute top of the nation. And the recruiting at the offensive line position for several years now has been like, yeah, there's some good pieces there. But it's not, it's not on the same plane as a lot of the other position groups. And then you start asking some questions about why.
Yeah. And if you just look at the numbers and the production, Ohio State led the Big Ten in conference games at 5.2 yards per carry. They were, I think, number 3 nationally in all games at 5.2 yards per carry, or with the whatever they ended up finishing with. But you look at the 30 rushes, 64 yards against Michigan. Yes, some of that is sacks, but that's also on the offensive line. So it you can go ahead and throw that in there. The rushing for 110 yards against Utah, and it's sure they only ran the ball 20 times, but they couldn't establish the run to continue it. Travion Henderson had 6 carries for 9 yards in the first half. They didn't run the ball well against Oregon, like 90 yards against Nebraska. This is not, it's not acceptable, and it's you have to, I guess, reassert your dominance, your ability to run. I know we talk about how Ryan Day likes to throw the ball so much, but if they were able to run the ball better, maybe that Michigan game is different. Maybe they can keep the ball. Maybe they can certainly keep the ball for Michigan and do some things there. Like this has been coming, I think, for a while, and recruiting is, I think recruiting is the bigger issue here. And
Mm-hmm.
not that they didn't land some outstanding recruits, because there was a point, I think, I mean, they could have thrown out 4 or 5 5-star offensive linemen at one point this year and played with those guys. Not Harry Miller per se, because he was injured, but they've gotten 5-star guys every year. But then it's sometimes it's the guys that get away. Sometimes it's the guys that you end up signing. That's really, I think, one of the is that one of the things that Bill Green says? It's not the guys that get away; it's the guys that you have to make up for losing. Like that, you sign these reaches and try to do something with, and that's where you have to be a great developer. And there's examples of the development that Greg Studrawa has done. Do you want to give him credit for Thayer Munford? I think you also obviously have to give credit to the players. I just think there's enough question marks where you should, at Ohio State, be able to get one of the nation's best offensive line coaches, developers, or recruiters. And I don't know, he's pretty good at a lot of stuff, but is he great at any one thing? And is it's less than pretty good at some other things, and I think maybe that's where the recruiting gets in, and then we look around. If DeJuan Jones were to leave for the NFL this year, who is their right tackle? And that goes back to the recruiting,
right? And that's the kind of the big red flag to me is, he came in 2016,
mm-hmm.
and a year or two later, it was like, oh boy, the bomb dropped from a couple misses in recruiting, and they were real thin on that offensive line. And then they brought people in, and they built things back up, and they brought Jonah Jackson in as a grad transfer and all that, and ended up having, this year, okay, was the last couple of years since 2018, it's been a pretty good offensive line. But yeah, you take Thayer Munford off this team, and you take Nick Petit-Frere off this team. And, if you take DeJuan Jones off this team, if DeJuan Jones does declare, yeah, who is the other tackle on this team next year? Paris Johnson is your left tackle. Okay, that's good. That's an important position. And he is one of the best recruits that Ohio State landed during Studrawa's tenure with the Buckeyes. But after that, it's like, boy, you can kind of squint and see it. And I mean, I know who the backup tackles were this year, but I don't know that those are necessarily.
My thought goes to Josh Fryer.
Yeah, Josh Fryer, and he was hurt a bunch. Yeah, he was hurt a bunch this year, so he's a possibility. We saw Enoch Mahi playing tackle. He was the backup left tackle this year. He's a possibility. Like, are those guys who are national championship caliber offensive linemen? We don't really know yet. Maybe, but they had built the depth up to the point that it was like, wow, this is incredible depth on the offensive line. And now you're kind of already back to like, if one guy leaves, all of a sudden it starts getting a little thin. And, that is, you can have one bad year in recruiting where you miss on a bunch of your top targets. But if you have a couple of those, you have 2 of those in the span of 3 years, all of a sudden, instead of having a JC Latham coming off the bench to be like, boom, here's the next starting tackle, then it's like, well, we're ending a lot of sentences with our voice kind of trailing up. Like, I don't really know who's going to be the next person.
Well, and you look at who that would be. I mean, you're talking about, is it Trey LaRue? Is it like even the year after? Who are the
Mm-hmm.
starting tackles? Zen Mahalski,
Mm-hmm.
Enoch Vamahi, Trey LaRue, Josh Fryer, Ben Crispin, Grant Toutant, maybe Donovan Jackson if they want to put him there. But it's like these are names that are not. I think Josh Fryer could play. I don't know if he's a
Mm-hmm.
tackle, but I think of this group, but it's an unproven group, and yeah, it's because they're young, but there are names there that I don't think people expect to play, and they might be relied upon heavily,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where that creates an issue that needs to get fixed immediately. Now I'm also thinking, just imagine if Thayer Munford and DeJuan Jones hadn't worked out, like because these
Mm-hmm.
were guys that were 3 or 4 star guys that uh, certainly Thayer Munford was very underranked, and maybe DeJuan Jones was as well, but they came through and just imagine if they hadn't. But you can't have too many guys that are never going to see the field, and that comes that's where the recruiting comes in as well, and you can only develop guys so much. Like there are guys that for years, every decade, every year, Ohio State signs guys that are never going to play at Ohio State. But if half of the offensive line is that, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and the challenge with the offensive line is, number one, it's a difficult position to evaluate, and number two, it is not a come in and play overnight kind of position. You don't see a lot of first year starting tackles the way you see first year starting running backs, for example, or first year guys coming in and just like, oh well, Marvin Harrison's just going to come in and play wide receiver and score 3 touchdowns in the Rose Bowl, or Chris Olave is going to come in and Garrett Wilson's going to come in and they can have huge freshman years. Like you don't see that on the offensive line because it generally takes time to build up your strength or find your technique, all that kind of stuff. So, this is like a deferred maintenance thing where it's like, I'll paint my house next year. Like it's fine. This year, I'm just not going to do it this year. And then next year, I don't want to deal. We'll do it with it later. And then eventually, like the paint starts peeling, and it's like, oh boy, oh now we've made a mess. Like you can kind of, it takes a little while for that issue to crop up. But then once it crops up, like this is all of a sudden now something you can't just immediately fix overnight unless, you go into the transfer portal and really pull in a lot of people. I mean, and they've missed in the transfer portal this offseason too. They had the kid from Florida International who Ohio State put out an offer to, and then they didn't get. So yeah, this is a little, it's not a problem yet. And this year was pretty good on the offensive line. It was not outstanding, but it was a pretty good offensive line. And next year they, if DeJuan Jones is back, I think they should have a pretty good offensive line next year as well. But you can just kind of see it coming. There's a little bit of a delayed reaction to these recruiting misses, and that train is coming down the tracks. They're going to have to fix it one way or the other.
That's why you have to look ahead, because it does take a while to fix this sort of thing. I mean, you can't put the track on right in front of the train. Like you've got to get it miles ahead so that things can keep moving smoothly. And there are no fixes in this class. Ohio State currently has 4 offensive linemen. There are no immediate, like I don't expect any of these guys to be starting next year, and they shouldn't need to. Again, if DeJuan Jones comes back, and even if he does, I think Josh Fryer, that maybe there's post spring somebody in the portal, something like that. You get a Jonah Jackson and bring somebody in, but this is a move for not just 2022 but 2023, and to salvage some class, to build relationships in the 2023 class, because you might need a starter in 2023. And it's clear that that's not something that Greg Studrawa has ever really been able to do. Was Michael Jordan, was 2016. That was a surprise start. Like they didn't go out and get
Yes.
him to start. He was a tackle and ended up starting at guard. And that was because all of their other recruits had kind of failed at that point in terms of stepping up when they needed them to. And so like the 4 guys they've got now are fine, but they're more year 2, year 3, year 4, and like the JC Lathams or Keontae Goodwins per se, like guys that you could conceivably, even though you shouldn't have to conceive of it, because you shouldn't have to rely on freshman offensive linemen to come in and step in and start. But those types of guys they've kind of missed on. And yeah, they did land Paris Johnson, but he was an in-state kid. Even Nick Petit Frere took 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
2 years to really get in there. And again, most people give that credit in recruiting to Greg Schiano, who had the previous relationship. But yeah, I applaud Day here because you do have to have foresight on this one because it's not something that can be fixed immediately.
Well, and the other thing is with the offensive line position, like there are certain areas of the country where you think like, okay, this is an area that produces great players at this position. Like you always used to go down to Florida and get your speedy skill guys. Texas, California, like lots of, the classic California quarterback, Texas quarterback, like that is, there's certain areas that you just think of with those kind of positions. When people around the country think of Ohio, they think of line play, especially offensive line play. Like the state of Ohio develops offensive line talent pretty well as compared to other positions around the field. Like Ohio State tends to take more running backs from other parts of the country, for example, than they do. They pull wide receivers from all over the country, but a lot of times you can pull. There are multiple good offensive linemen, like potentially Ohio State good offensive linemen in state. So this is not an area where you should be struggling to bring in. You bring in the three best Ohio offensive linemen, and then you go out and you pull the best 1 to 2 guys nationally. Like you go get that elite tackle, you go get the J.C. Latham out of IMG, or you go get Keontae Goodwin out of Indiana, or wherever it is. And just consistently, like Ohio State missed on, it felt like more in-state offensive linemen than they did like pretty much any other position. Like generally, if you had an Ohio State offer and you were an in-state kid and a linebacker, for example, like you're probably coming to Ohio State. They missed on so many in-state offensive linemen over the years. And it was like, okay, you lost what was his name? The tackle, the red 5-star tackle who went to Clemson,
Carman.
Yeah, Jackson Carman. They lost Jackson Carman. Okay, like you're going to lose one, and it's like, okay, well, this is a kid that wanted to go out of state. They just lost Blake Miller this year, who was like, both of his parents were Ohio State graduates. Like there was no reason to lose Blake Miller to Clemson. What other position group is losing players to Kentucky? Players that Ohio State wants losing to Kentucky. Like that is not a thing that happens anywhere else on the field. And you can credit Vince Marrow all you want, but it's like, it doesn't matter. You can put a great recruiter you can put a great recruiter at Missouri, and they shouldn't be losing kids to Missouri. I mean, it just, that shouldn't happen. You can always point to, oh, well, J.C. Latham, it was a situation with his mom and his dad, and they had different opinions and yada, yada, yada. And, Jackson Carman, well, he was just a different kind of kid. He wanted to go somewhere else. But it's like at some point, the pattern is pretty clear there, and you have to stop. You can't excuse it forever. We did talk earlier before we started about, there are some that are kind of excusable. In-state Catholic school kids who go to Notre Dame, it's like that's you shrug and say, what are you going to do, basically? Because there's a kid who's going to St. Ignatius, or a kid who's going to one of the Cincinnati Catholic schools. Like if they go to Notre Dame, they're going to Notre Dame, and there's nothing you can do about it. But other than that, like losing kids to out-of-state schools, or especially schools like Kentucky, like that just shouldn't happen.
Well, the state of Ohio had 4 4-star offensive linemen this year, and whatever you think of the star ratings, 3 of them went elsewhere. Emil Wagner from Wayne and Ohio State, near pipeline type of school, went to Notre Dame, and then Brian Bear from Eastlake, Ohio, went to Pitt. I'm not even sure if he had an Ohio State offer, but there is, like you said, Tom, as you're saying, there's talent in state. And then of course Blake Miller going to Clemson. He's at least the 3rd Ohio offensive lineman to go to Clemson over the last 4 or 5 years. And these are guys that shouldn't necessarily be getting out of state. There are certain positions where there are fences, and development being what it is, it's hard to develop these guys. And maybe it'd be better to, let's put our eggs in the Ohio basket rather than let's try some of these Florida kids or try some of these wherever kids and try to get in on them, knowing that it'd be easier just to bring in some of these Ohio kids who have the same kind of skill set. But I know it comes down to, well, we think this guy's better, so we're going to go after him. Okay. But if you don't get him, now you've ignored the Ohio kids, or you've put them on the back burner. And And I don't even know that they did that with Emil Wagner. That one was just that was an odd one for a while where I don't know if Ohio State was as interested in him as maybe the fans thought he should have been because he was so highly ranked. And there's some differing opinions on him, but yeah, a lot of this is the guys that from the out of state where Ohio State is leading for so long, and like Keontae Goodwin, J.C. Latham, where you've put them into class already, and then it's like, well, now then you start to hear whispers. You're like, oh, is it happening again? Is this guy that everybody thought was going to be a Buckeye? It's no, and I have to imagine that for Ryan Day, that got pretty tiresome, and maybe that was the. I wonder if that's the final straw, or if it's not being able to run the ball against Michigan.
Yeah, and I mean, there was that certain pattern where it was like you'd have the in-state guys. It's like, well, that's a good fallback, and then by the time they had whiffed on the national guys, and they fell back to the fallbacks, those guys were gone, and it was like, okay, well, now on to Plan C. And again, this is not happening at other position groups. So at some point, you have to kind of look. Like I know there are people who are big Studrawa defenders, and it's like, I mean, at some point, this stops being a coincidence when the failures kind of happen in the same way over and over and over again. Like once it becomes a pattern, it's like, okay, so this may be, this may just be how this is. And I don't think you could even say that this was like a really hasty decision, because this has happened a number of years in a row. It wasn't like this was the first year that they had a class that, Bill Green and Mark Givler did a fantastic Gives in the Bank episode when Carson Hinzman committed this week, and talked about the fact that, I think it was Bill who said that you look at it, Ohio State's wide receiver class. And if you had told Brian Day 12, 18 months ago, here's what your 2022 wide receiver class was going to look like, he was going to go, yeah, all right, thumbs up. Quarterback, sure, absolutely, looks great. Linebackers, yeah, two thumbs up, absolutely, looks great. Offensive line, sorry, what? We got who? And, no slight on the guys who they signed, but, 18 months ago, we're talking about all sorts of, Zach Rice, all sorts of national names. And, those were names that Ohio State, I think, felt they had a legitimate chance to get in on. And then to not get any of them is a pretty big issue. And, they think George Fitzpatrick is, potentially a good tackle, high upside player. Carson Hinzman is, there's never a sure thing at on the offensive line, but Carson Hinzman is a fairly sure thing as far as offensive line prospects go. It's not like there's no talent. Avery Henry is, it's a real upside play. You want to call him a project or whatever. I mean, you have guys. Tegra Shabola was, he's at the All-American game right now. There's obviously some talent there, but just the top end of the class, just it's like they're missing a guy or two at the top end of the class. And to have four guys and not have, one of those 5-star guys somewhere, or like real borderline 5-star guys, is, that really stands out as compared to the recruiting at most other spots on the field.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the top 12 tackles in the 24/7 composite for the 2022 class, and here's some names that people will remember: Zach Rice, Keontae Goodwin, Tyler Booker, Tegra Shabola, and Emil Wagner. They were in on all 5 of those guys. They got one of them, and you get another one, and it makes the entire class look better. Because again, I'm still wondering if there is an actual tackle in this class, and maybe it is Fitzpatrick, but like that's the concern. And people joke, well, you're looking so far down the road, but you have to. That's how you operate with the offensive line. They operate like that with all of their positions. But if you're only looking at this year and next year, then you're going to be caught off guard. You're going to be relying on the transfer portal, hoping that something is there. And also, that's not a great way to operate with recruiting, to just go like a year at a time. Like there are so many relationships being built while you're still like, oh, we're doing fine right now. And you're not looking ahead far enough. And then you're getting left behind. And so I know there's some concern, some question about what does this mean for the commitment of Carson Hinzman. And you and I were talking before the show. It sure seems like this is something that wouldn't have caught him off guard.
I mean, it would be pretty foolish for them to have just kind of thought like, well, we're going to do this, but we're definitely not going to tell him until after he commits. And then, oh boy, won't that be a fun surprise? this is the era of the transfer portal. This is the era of instant transfers. This is the era of, and this is not even a player who's actually signed yet. He doesn't sign until February. Wisconsin just lost their offensive line coach, Joe Rudolph. And then, so now Ohio State's also, changing offensive line coaches. My suspicion, and I don't have this, I don't know this for sure. It would be interesting to hear. Hinzman is down at the All-American game with Mark and Kevin this week, so I'd be interested to hear from them if they can get an answer on this. But my assumption would be that he probably knew this was coming, and the fact that Ohio State is letting him go leads me to believe they probably know who the replacement is as well. And so, the fact that they've let him go, the fact that this is not necessarily the last change we're expecting, the fact that this came out leads me to believe they know who the next person is. I would assume that's been communicated to Hinzman. It's possible that it hasn't, but it just seems like that would be a very, this is not Mike Weber signing and then Stan Drayton leaving the next day. Like, he hasn't signed yet. Mm-hmm. He has another almost month before he actually does sign. There's nothing to be accomplished by kind of, hiding this, accepting a commitment, and then, a day later, ta-da, your position coach is gone. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But, like I said, I would be very interested to see if Mark and Kevin down at the All-American game can find out from Hinzman, what he knew and when he knew it.
Tom, Carson removed his finger from the checker. You cannot then reverse that move. Once you take the finger off, it is set in stone. I know the popular name that people keep talking about to replace Greg Studrawa is UCLA offensive line coach, offensive coordinator Justin Fry. Fry played in the Big Ten. I'm pretty sure we've talked about him before on the show. Mm-hmm. He coached with Day for a year at Temple and 2 years at Boston College, so they have a relationship. There's relationships all within. I mean, he's obviously Fry right now working with Chip Kelly, who is Ryan Day's mentor, and so they have that relationship. But there's so many relationships. Like, if you go look at who like Justin Fry is following, there's all kinds of Ohio State people there, and that's not recent. That's a long time ago. So I don't know if that's going to be the guy. Sometimes the first name you hear is just the most not just the most well known,
most obvious.
Yes,
the most obvious. Yeah.
And then the head coach actually has an entirely different list.
Well, and the interesting dynamic here is Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, who are very good friends, and Kelly is one of Day's mentors, and Day's talked about the fact that they will talk all the time. And Chip Kelly's tenure at UCLA has not gone fantastic, and I forget now when, but at some point soon-ish, Chip Kelly's buyout drops. So if Chip Kelly's going to get fired after his buyout drops, then you're not hosing your good friend Chip Kelly by taking Justin Fry. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. And if this is a better opportunity for Justin Fry, I'm sure Chip Kelly probably wouldn't begrudge him that. But we talked about the fact that Ohio State was right at the top of the list of best yards per rushing attempt. They were third in the country, 5.6 yards per rushing attempt. UCLA is 19th, 5.2. So they're also right in the top of that. And, UCLA rather notably does not have Travion Henderson, mm-hmm. for example. So, the offensive line did just fine for UCLA this year. So yeah, that'll be interesting. And, the question about how he's going to recruit is kind of an open one, because, UCLA does not recruit from the same pool that Ohio State does. And UCLA also, Chip Kelly recruits very differently than Ryan Day does. Chip Kelly, for his first couple of years at UCLA, was very, very stingy with offers. It was like, certain schools will offer 300 kids in a class. Mm-hmm. UCLA, I think, it offered like 75 or something like that in one of the classes right after he got there. He just has a different philosophy of recruiting than a lot of different coaches do. So, I think you kind of have to grade Fry's recruiting incomplete at UCLA, just because, even if you want to look at how he did, I'm not sure that it really applies or that really carries over to what Ohio State's going to do.
Same with Jim Knowles. Like, that's mm-hmm. you have no idea what he is as a recruiter because the pool is different. Now, just looking at Justin Fry's 24/7 recruiting page, he's only ever landed 2 4-star commits. One was 2017 at Boston College. The other was 2018 at UCLA. But again, we're just speculating on names and only not even names, just name. And if more pop up, we'll certainly discuss that. But Tom, it's the end of an era here at Ohio State, as Greg Studrawa is off the Ohio State football roster. Ryan Day will be replacing him soon. Any other thoughts before we get out of here?
No, I think, people have accused Ryan Day of being, he's a little too soft. He's a little too nice. He doesn't keep, he doesn't have everyone on edge like Urban Meyer did. And then you look at the track record with assistant coaches, and Urban Meyer was very proud of the fact that he'd never fired an assistant coach. And it was, that was Zach Smith was the first one that he ever fired. And that was, obviously, the track record there in a couple different areas was also like, there's kind of a pattern here of stuff not happening the way it should. And he stayed on and he stayed on and he stayed on until it was completely impossible for him to stay on. I mean, Ryan Day has shown he is willing to make changes. And that went from day one of his time at Ohio State, where, we're out at the Rose Bowl and talking to coaches in 2018, and everyone's going, oh yeah, I think I'm going to be back. I hope to be back. I expect to be back. And then, come back to Columbus, and some of those people we haven't seen since then. So, that Ryan Day has shown he's willing to make some tough decisions, even with people he's worked alongside for years in some cases. And so I think you kind of have to trust that Ryan Day is going to do what he thinks is best for the program. And, not every decision is going to be a home run, but he is definitely not a person who's standing pat right now and looking at this going, oh, all right, 11-2 in a Rose Bowl. Like, yeah, that is good enough. Fantastic. Everybody, we're just going to run it back next year. Like, that is very much not what he's doing right now.
No. And for that reason alone, the fans should be excited, or just a little more, I want to say patient, but the fact that he's doing something and it's not good enough, and he does not want to waste another year of CJ Stroud, another year of Travion Henderson and the receivers. And I'm not saying waste, and not that these years are wastes or anything like that, but you have windows to win a national title, and you have a national championship caliber quarterback and skill positions, and you need that offensive line to hold up their end of the bargain, to be as good as everybody around them, just like you do on defense. And if people think that Ryan Day is coddling his coaches, just wait. Just wait, and you'll see. I think there's more coming, but that will do it for this edition. Want to thank you all for tuning in. We still have some other shows coming from the live stream to finish up that whole segment from the day after the Rose Bowl, answering viewer questions and talking about this year, talking about next year, and everything in between. So look for that. And that will do it for us today. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you tomorrow.